Let's start with some housekeeping. Welcome everybody. This webinar starts right now. We have automated captions, which you can turn on by pressing the CC button in Zoom. The captions are in English. And we record this webinar and will then publish possibly next week on our YouTube channel for you to rewatch it, or for those who could not make it today. Your microphone is muted and your camera as well, to avoid background noise. The setup is that we'll have a short presentation, and after that we have a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions and not the chat. I won't be able to follow both. If you have a technical problem, please write it in the chat. But any questions that you would like us to discuss afterwards, or me to respond afterwards, please put it in the Q&A. Of course, you can ask your questions anytime, not only at the end. Then I'll have a nice list and I try to address them. So let's start. The topic of today's Free Friday webinar is getting tables right, how to create clear, accessible tables, and how to do it effectively, how to make them effective so as many people as possible can understand them. So we'll look at tables and how different users experience them, what can go wrong, and how to make these tables work for everybody. I'm Peter Kamin. I'm an accessibility and standards specialist, and I'm a certified professional in accessibility core competencies and I'm an accessible document specialist. I have the CPAC and the ADS certification from IAAP. So tables are great for structuring data, and that's why they should be used for, but they can quickly become barriers if they are not created properly. For example, you see on the screen the text Arsenal, Atletico Madrid, Villarreal, Manchester City, Copenhagen, Dortmund, Barcelona, Olympiacos, Chelsea, Ajax, 4002246151. It's very difficult to understand. This information should be structured better, and if they are provided in a table, then that table should tell a story which everybody can follow. So let's see how it would look like in a table. It's a simple table. First column is the match. The second is the score. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to see who had the final score 0-2, Villarreal, Manchester City, and it's easy to jump from one information to the other. So let's look at what are the user needs, what do we need to pay attention to satisfy all users and to make a table work for as many people as possible. Let's first talk about visually impaired users, and among them screen reader users. They need a proper table structure, which means there should be a header row, and possibly a first column, a header column as well. And that helps to contextualize the data in the table. And it should be organized in a clear and simple fashion, so the assistive technology can interpret the data meaningfully. It means that if it's properly set up, then screen reader users are able to navigate and understand the table. And what is needed for that is that the table is properly marked up, that the code behind the table is adequate. Another group is users with low vision who might not use screen readers. They need that the colors used in a table have the right contrast, so the text against the background, or if there's shading as well, it should keep the text readable. And it is important to say that it's good to use colors. It's important and good to mark up, for example, the first row and the first column of a table with shading, so that the user can see that those are the headers. But it's important that if you do that, then the shading should have the proper color contrast. So both dot shades should be a nice contrast, have enough contrast against the usually white of the data cells and the backgrounds. And then the text against this shading should have enough contrast as well. Another important thing to mention is users with low vision might use magnification, might want to zoom in the table. So it's important that on the one hand, the table layout allows that as much as possible, the data can be kept together. The header data can be identified for the data cells in the middle of the table. And but another solution, for example, what Excel offers is that you can freeze the first column and the first row. So when you move around the table, it is possible, it is always visible, the headers are always visible, and it is possible to get your data close to them. So even with magnification, it would be possible to get the right data and see all the data that's needed. Another group of users is users with cognitive impairment. They need a simplified and clearly labeled table to avoid overwhelming amounts of data. And they also need that the data and the way the text is presented does not create cognitive overload, so that the table is understandable. And the last group I'll mention today is users with motor impairment who use keyboards to navigate the table. It is important that when a table is navigated with keyboards, so pressing the tab key, then the focus is following a logical order. Usually it's a horizontal order, so going left to right and row by row. It's not only users with motor impairment who use the keyboard to navigate the table. Another user group is, for example, blind people. So we can see that different users need different cues, and it's important to have the right markup, the right reading order, and simplicity and clarity to make tables usable for everyone. Now let's dwell into it a bit. I'll talk to you about the basics of tables, and then I will have a more practical presentation or way of looking at table to understand how screen reader users, for example, navigate a table. So first of all, as I mentioned, keep the table simple. If the table is too difficult, if it has other tables in it, if it's more than one table, if there are nested tables, if it has more header rows, for example, then it can become difficult to understand for anybody. Then, of course, also use readable font size. Don't try to cram too much data into one cell, and to be able to do that, make the font size smaller and smaller to the point that it is very difficult to see it. Of course, one can magnify a table, but then all the other information gets lost. So once you magnify a very small text, then you lose sight of the headers, for example. Ensure that there's enough space for text, so the table is not too cramped. There's not one cell right close to the other. The numbers are close to each other, so it's difficult to differentiate. So you should use enough space around the text, but not too much either, because then that will be counterproductive for magnification. And use horizontal text. Never use vertical text, for example, in the header row, to fit the information there, because horizontal text is easy to read. Vertical text can be difficult to process for some. So we were talking about a simple layout, or readable layout. Let's talk about the complexity of the content. Aim to reduce complexity to keep the data easy to understand. One way of doing that, if you don't really need a table, because it's actually the content of the table could very easily be a list, then turn it into a list. If you don't need a table and you can present the information in a list, then please do that. Don't use table for formatting, nearly never. That means, for example, if you want to present text in 2 columns and you create a table and put text in the left and to the right, or put text to the left and and insert an image to the right, that is when you use a table for formatting. And it is you should avoid that, because assistive technology would still recognize it as a table, and the users would expect tabular data that should be presented into tables, and it makes it difficult to understand. More experienced users might get it right away. Users who have less experience might get very confused and don't understand what's happening. And then if your table is complex, if it actually has nested tables or tries to put two-dimensional, present two timelines at the same time, then better to break it up into parts and create two tables. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the structure and the layout of the table. And as I promised, I'll start with a practical presentation. This is a visual presentation, but the idea is that to present what's happening in the background in the code. What I mean by that, you have here a very simple table. You can, if you read it carefully, see that the first row is a header row, the first column is the header column. These are the data that are necessary, that provide the context for understanding the data in the middle. So, for example, this 668 is the number of national political parties in the 2004-2009 parliamentary session, European parliamentary session. If, just go back quickly to the previous slide, if the table is like this, it's difficult to understand visually. And if this represents also the coding, meaning that the header cells are not different from the data cells, then this context is not encoded, is not provided in the markup. So a screen reader would, for example, read out this cell as row 5, column 3, 168. You don't know what it means. If you would not be able to see this table, you would not be able to understand what the 168 refers to. Now, if you mark up these header cells, the header row and the header column, and make sure that assistive technology understands that these are headers, these are the contextual information necessary to understand the data, then when a screen reader user walks around the table and gets to 168, the text that what screen reader reads out is row 5, number of national political parties, column 3, 2004-2009, the value 168. So now the user can understand what this 168 means. The way it works actually, if then you press the right arrow, so you move to the right, it depending on the settings of a screen reader, it might not read out the row context. So it might not read out the number of national political parties, only that it's 2009-2014. So it is still a very easy way to navigate, and it's not overloading with information the screen reader user. Okay, so what do we need to do in order to make sure that this markup is happening? First of all, use real tables. Let's take an example. When you create a table in Word, then you don't draw it, you don't draw the borders and create the content with pressing tabs and enter, but you insert a table, and then that table will be filled up with data. Actually, in Word, if you insert a table from the tool that's provided, then it will mark up the header row and the header column automatically. You don't need to change it. But if it's not marked up, then you need to set this header row and header column yourself. Avoid multiple headers if possible. It happens often that there are two header rows. One is with bigger groups, and then in the second row there are subgroups of the cells in the first row. It is something that, for example, Word cannot handle. So screen reader users using Word will not be able to understand what's happening. But PDF, for example, can handle it. But the main advice, if you use Word, avoid it. If you use PDF, again, still better to avoid it. It makes the structure more simple, more easy to understand. The same way, avoid merged and split cells because it will create irregularities. It will be difficult in Word, for example, to understand what are the headers that belong, what is the contextual information that belongs to that data. And logically, don't have an empty table header cell because that would mean that you have the data and then the table header contains no information. From another perspective, more from the visual perspective, do not only format headers or markup headers as headers in the code, but also format them visually so users can see right away what is the header information, what is the contextual information, and what is the data. If your table spills over to another page, then repeat the header rows on both pages. Word, for example, had a built-in function for that. And use banded rows, meaning that every second row is shaded slightly, so it's easy to differentiate between the different rows. It makes tables easier to understand for users with certain cognitive impairments. And what helps understanding table is adding a caption. So the typical text under a table, table 1 shows data of the European Parliamentary sessions in the last 4 sessions. And a table summary is something that you can add in the background. It's information for assistive technology that provides, that tells you how the table is, how many columns and rows it has, and that it has, for example, split or merged cells. It will make it easier for users of assistive technology to understand the table structure. Then, as I mentioned, it's also important to keep it simple, keep it readable and understandable. It means not repeating content in the table. A table is usually a consigned set of presenting data. As always, start with the most important information and aim to replace special characters with text. For example, change a hyphen to the word to. So here is our original table, what I was showing before. There's a lot of text here, there's the hyphens here, and here is a version that's simplified and avoids repeating number of, for example, and it's much more easier to understand. And the very last thing I would like to show you is the visual presentation of what I was talking about, the complex table when it's a nested table, when it's more than one table in one. Here you have an example. There are 2 timelines. There's the data from 2006-07 and the 2019 data presented in the same table. It's much better if you just separate this into 2 tables. It will be much easier to understand and to navigate it. So that's what I wanted to tell you about tables. Now we got to the part when you can ask questions. So I tried to get to the Q&A and see. Yes, I have some nice questions. I have a feedback that somebody had a low speaker volume. I'm sorry, I hope not many of you had that. We'll try to knock up the volume if it's necessary in the recording. There's a question, in an annual report, the tables often have subheadings, for example, to group different categories in an income statement. How do I handle these to make accessible table? Yes. So sometimes it's not avoidable to have multiple headings. Very good example is a financial table where you are not allowed to change the structure. As I said, in Word, it's not possible, so you would need to do it in PDF. And PDF makes it possible to have multiple headers. And okay, and meanwhile, I'm going back. Somebody said that didn't see the do and don't undo example, so I'm showing that in the screen meanwhile. So the PDF makes it possible to associate a data cell to more than one header cell. So typically the main category in a financial table and then the breakdown. It is possible to say that this number, this many euros belongs to this main category and this breakdown category. It is a very technical thing and we don't have time to show it. I would suggest I will, right after this, I will mention that we will have trainings and we'll cover this as well. So it's possible to learn how to do it. It just doesn't really fit to explain it here now. I'm saying then there's one question saying, does scope row / column have support in Word to PDF document tagging? So the question is about whether row and column scope is a term from the PDF domain. If you have a table in a PDF document, then the settings include telling the PDF whether a header cell has effect on the data below, so that it has the column scope, or whether it affects or it is related to the data that in the same row. So it would have the scope set as row. Whether Word has a support to do that to PDF document tagging, if I understand well the question, then my answer is that lately, when you export a document with a table from Word to PDF, it is this setting of whether a header cell has a row scope or a column scope is already done in PDF. More and more times when I export from Word to PDF, I see that it is properly tagged. Then another question is, merged and split cells can have correct header assignments, but yes, Word can export them as PDF not well. And there are a lot of scenarios where merged split cells help to understand data much better. Is there any official requirement that does not permit merged or split cells? No, and it's true. Sometimes creating a merged or split cells make it easier to understand the table because you don't need to repeat all the text, for example. The requirement, I would say, is that there should be a proper assignment between header information and data cell information. So if Word cannot do that, then you should avoid it, because then the markup of your table will not be accessible. It is not forbidden to do it if you can solve this header cell association, and you can do that in PDF. So in PDF you can use merged and split cells, but you have to have the proper setup after that. You have to make sure that the data cell has the right header cells associated. Cells without values are sometimes unavoidable. Can they be left empty, or do you need to insert something like a dash for the tables to be considered accessible? Can empty cells cause technical problems with screen readers? So I said to avoid empty cells when it's a header. So all header cells which provide this contextual information for table need to have information. As for a data cell, the best practice is to write in text, if it's 0, to write 0, if there's no data, to say no data. We don't encourage using a dash or a hyphen because that has other meanings. It can be read out as minus, for example, by the screen reader. So it's better not to do that. Leaving it empty is actually something that the assistive technology can handle, but it's clearer if you put in some text to say that there's no data here. So it's not really the technical problems it can create if the screen reader is, for example, set up properly, but the user might not be able to understand. And I won't have time to answer all the questions. If the right markup is used, can the reading order still be wrong? I think yes. In PDF, you can originally, with the right markup, it has the right reading order, but if you would move around things in the, so to say, Z order, so the old reading order, which, for example, controls how you can select the text or when it's reflown. Also, this reading order is used. So if you start playing with that and you would mix up and create the wrong order, then it's possible to have a bad reading order, even if the markup is proper. How can you guarantee that you can zoom in tables? So first is what I said, that in Excel, for example, to freeze the first row and the first column, so you can put in the corner your data and see what are the associated header cells. But it's also to make sure that you don't have too much white space in your table, so more information is available on your magnified screen. And the other thing I mentioned is to repeat the header row information in a new page. And well, we have many more questions, but we aim to keep it within half an hour. So I will look at the questions afterwards, and probably we always send out a thank you letter with the link to the recording, and we'll try to answer the questions that I didn't have time for. Because I need to mention two more things at the end of the webinar. On the one hand, as I said, that this webinar is providing the basics, an overview of what is important to pay attention to when you use tables. So all user needs are considered. And I would be remiss if I don't mention that if you want to learn more, if you want to learn how to do it, we provide trainings. And we have different trainings. We have role-based trainings considering what developers, what designers or content creators need. Even we can provide a training for procurers, which is a whole different aspect sometimes. We have trainings for IAAP certification for WAS, ADS, and CPAC. But we have trainings from the foundations of accessibility through to more specific topics, for example, on cognitive accessibility or accessible social media or assistive technology and user needs. And we have a set of document trainings which would explain you how to handle tables in Word, PDF, PowerPoint, etc. And we have trainings on policy and legislation to explain the standards, to explain the EAA or the Web Accessibility Directive, mainly European legislation. You can find our offer or the description of how to sign up for a training or on our webpage, funkafoundation.org/training. And if there's any specific demand or request for a specific training, then email us or have any questions to info@funkafoundation.org. And finally, the next Friday webinar is in 2 weeks. It will be at the same time as usually at 1:30. The topic is captions, subtitles, or transcripts. So it's again kind of a content type webinar, and it will be held by Susanna Lowry, Managing Director and Chair of the Funka Foundation. If you want to learn more, please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. You have the QR codes on the screen, and probably we share the link in the chat as well. You cannot see the chat at the same time, but my colleague probably have already done it, yes. And basically, that's it for today. Thank you for joining. I hope you learned something or get some information structured. And see you in 2 weeks on our next Friday webinar. Have a nice weekend.